On the north bank of the River Seine, above a scruffy road tunnel, people gather from all over the world, at all hours of the day and night. This replica of the Flame of Liberty, given by the United States in 1987 as a symbol of friendship with France, has become an unofficial shrine for quite a different cause. This unremarkable site has become one of the world's great places of pilgrimage, as much as Lourdes. For it was immediately below here that one of the great icons of our time, Diana, Princess of Wales, met her sudden, violent, and shocking death. In the new global age, this scene instantly became part of our global memory. But what really happened here? Was this really a straightforward car crash caused by a driver who had drunk too much and driven too fast? Or was Diana murdered? In this program, we bring new evidence to light and for the first time resolve some of the most persistent questions. So who really did kill Diana?
I thought it was a hoax at first.
There are many things that people say that she was killed and it was a murder, so I want to know.
I just think that someone either tampered with the car or absolutely pumped into her deliberately on the road.
Murder, it's a murder. I believe it.
We'll never know.
I think the royal family may have thought that she was an embarrassment to them.
I have a conspiracy theory that she was murdered.
After a Mediterranean holiday at the end of August 1997, Princess Diana and her friend Dodi Al Fayed were returning to London, stopping over in Paris for one night and staying here at Dodi's Champs-Élysées apartment. From the moment of their arrival, the couple were dodging the paparazzi, and in the evening aborted a visit to a fashionable restaurant to seek refuge for the night at Paris's Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed. As the ever-pursuing paparazzi gathered outside, Dodi and Diana changed their minds about staying at the Ritz and decided to go back again to Dodi's flat. They planned to try and slip out unobtrusively from the hotel's rear exit. In a further attempt to throw the press off the scent, they thought they wouldn't go directly to Dodi's Champs-Élysées apartment, but take a diversion along the river, doubling back further on. At midnight 20 on the morning of the 31st of August, according to the counter on the Ritz's security camera, the couple left the hotel on their final, fatal journey. The car was driven by the Ritz's acting head of security, Henri Paul, and a bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, sat in the front passenger seat. Diana sat in the back, on the right. This is the route they took. The ruse to throw the paparazzi off the scent didn't work. Dodi and Diana were spotted leaving the Ritz, and several paparazzi set off in hot pursuit along this road. We know a good deal about this journey, because not only were the paparazzi following close behind, the car was seen en route by several eyewitnesses. The hired black Mercedes S280 accelerated fast to try and give the photographers the slip. About 3 to 4 minutes after leaving the Ritz, just after 00:23:15, the black Mercedes approached this underpass below the Place de l'Alma and crashed.
I saw this black Mercedes on the other side of the tunnel. I saw some smoke around the wreckage, and the horn was still on. Inside, there were 4 people. 2 on the left side were apparently already dead, and the 2 other people were still alive. They were breathing, they were screaming. So the first thing I had to do was to call the emergency services. After that, I went to my trunk to pick up the only equipment I had because I was off duty. It's a respiratory bag. This pretty woman was sitting on the floor between the 2 rows of seats. She was unconscious. She was just moaning and moving her hands and her arms in every direction. That means that she was a little bit in pain, but she couldn't talk words. I had to sit on the back seat to have access to her face. And I helped her to breathe, and I did some maneuvers to lift up her face and applied the respiratory bag. And after that, she began to react a little bit more.
Dr. Maillet's call to the emergency services was made at 0026, about 2.5 minutes after the crash. 6 minutes later, at 0032, the first of 3 ambulances arrived. Dr. Maillet left soon after, apparently still unaware of the identity of the woman in the car. The accident happened at about 0023. Diana did not arrive at the hospital until 2:06. That's 1 3/4 hours later.
If she had an injury that needed surgery to put right, why did it take such an enormous amount of time to get her from the point of the accident to a hospital within a major city? It was a ridiculous amount of time. So what went on in the tunnel during that time?
When the car hit the pillar, then the near side of the car obviously came to a halt immediately. And the side with Diana in tried to carry on going, which is what caused the spin on the car. It was the way that her heart then travelled across her chest, moving across towards the right, that tore the left pulmonary vein. It was a matter of inches as to whether the car would glance off or actually be spun. If it hadn't have actually hit the pillar at the angle that it did, it would probably have carried on down the tunnel, having a chance to come to a halt, and there probably wouldn't have been a fatal accident at all. If she had been sitting actually with her seatbelt on, then the impact would have been taken up by the seatbelt, but her heart wouldn't have been thrown a great distance. It would have come to a halt against the breastbone. She might have ended up with cardiac contusions, but it wouldn't have torn her pulmonary vein.
You couldn't see that much on the body of Princess Diana. Her face was not injured, just few drops of blood, but that's it. And few drops on her dress and her leg, but that's it.
Extricating her from the car posed a difficult challenge for the emergency crew, which had now arrived and taken over from Dr. Maillet.
She's got a critically injured person behind her to her left. She's got bodies behind her and in front of her to her right. So there's very little access. And of course, it was also the time of people being very aware of spinal injuries. The rescuers did not want to be responsible for Princess Diana being in a wheelchair because of their incompetence. It's like me giving you a tin of sardines that I've attacked with a lump hammer and then setting a timer going and telling you to get the sardines out intact.
To make things worse, as they removed her from the car, Princess Diana's heart stopped, and there was a further delay as the emergency surgeon restarted it. It took the emergency services about an hour before the ambulance finally left at 1:35. It was heading for the Hospital La Pitié-Salpêtrière, 3.7 miles away.
A new car, difficult to cut, multiple casualties in the vehicle. That is not the fastest extrication, but on the other hand, it's not unreasonable.
This is the route the ambulance took, and it travelled at about 12 miles per hour. At about 1:55 on the Pont d'Austerlitz, within sight of the hospital, the ambulance had to stop again. This picture, taken by a paparazzi, shows a police officer accompanying the ambulance talking to the hospital on a mobile phone, and a surgeon in the ambulance trying to restart Princess Diana's heart, which had stopped for a second time. Finally, at 2:06, the ambulance arrived at Pitié-Salpêtrière.
Le boulevard se couvre de...
The boulevard was covered with blue arc lights, from the beginning of the road right up to here. The only person who was allowed in was the prefect of police. He said to me, "Monsieur, I am requisitioning a very strong word, your hospital. I am taking control of it, I am taking possession of it." The ambulances arrive here. It gives access to the operating theatre 1 floor below, and this is where they treated the Princess of Wales.
Like Dr. Calland, Monsieur Marès also thinks the time taken by the ambulance was quite understandable.
We were dealing with injuries requiring treatment of the very highest precision. If a vein or an artery were to break, it would be the end. She was so close to death. If the ambulance had driven fast, it would have risked precipitating her death. And there's something else. The SAMU in France is so sophisticated. It's not just a fast ambulance. It's a sort of mobile operating theatre on 4 wheels. It means that immediate frontline treatment can be administered to the patient inside it.
Another issue which has aroused the suspicion of those who believe Princess Diana was murdered is why did the ambulance go to Salpêtrière at all, when there were at least 2 major hospitals nearer the crash site?
Parisian hospitals rotate on an emergency duty roster. That night it was our turn to be on what we call high priority duty, which means that the best experts are put on standby here with the necessary members of staff to help them in case patients arrive by helicopter in desperate condition and need to be treated. On that night, it was our turn to be on duty.
For 2 hours after Princess Diana's arrival at the hospital, surgeons fought desperately to keep her heart going and to stop internal bleeding, while the outside world waited for news.
What is your view of what is now happening at the hospital?
Well, I'm worried. We've got this report about the concussion and about the broken arm and about the cuts to her thigh, but one wonders if one is being told the whole truth at the moment.
Stephen, I have to interrupt there because within the last few moments, unconfirmed source from the Press Association is that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. And as soon as there is any further news, we will bring it to you.
Une thoracotomie d'urgence a mis en évidence une plaie importante de la veine pulmonaire gauche. Malgré la fermeture de cette plaie et un massage cardiaque externe puis interne de 2 heures, aucune efficacité circulatoire n'a pu être rétablie et le décès a été constaté à 4 heures du matin.
Princess Diana had died, quite literally, of a broken heart.
Frankly, she needed to be in the hospital operating theatre within 5 or 6 minutes of her accident to have a really good chance of survival. The problem was that she had arrested initially and had not had a cardiac output since the time she came out of the vehicle. She was effectively long dead, but it takes an awful lot of courage for someone to turn around and say the Princess of Wales has died. And so they kept going long after anyone else they'd have called it.
Well, she was called a loose cannon.
A loose cannon?
She was a loose cannon, wasn't she?
I think she was probably murdered, yes.
I don't think it was an accident.
A murder made to look like an accident.
Landmines banned, I think that upset quite a lot of people.
They didn't want stepsons to be Muslims.
Think about the white Mini, and it was never found.
She was embalmed.
The Flash.
British intelligence were involved in it.
There's so many contradictory things. You can't just accept it as a plain, straightforward accident.
Lady Diana. It was in 1980 that Lady Diana Spencer first came to the attention of the world.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course. Diana's fairy tale marriage was truly the stuff of legend.
Does Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got.
Her beauty, informality, and charm turned her immediately into a global icon. But eventually, Diana's marriage disintegrated, and the dream turned into a royal embarrassment. Diana tried to carve out a new role for herself, championing sometimes controversial causes. It was against this background that many regarded her sudden, violent death with intense suspicion.
When I was at Kensington Palace one day, we were just sitting down having good old natter, and the phone went, and she had a phone call, and she actually got hold of me, pulled me next to the phone, so her ear was one side, my ear was clonked against the other side, and she received a threat against her life, and it was regarding the landmines, telling her not to meddle in matters she knows nothing about, and that accidents can happen.
From what I understand, her death was organised and carried out by MI5. My contention has always been that they considered Diana had become so powerful that she had become a threat to the royal family.
The royal family and the forces around the royal family in terms of the establishment, security agencies, MI5, MI6, and more secretive societies even than that, are not Mary Poppins. These people have no problem with removing someone, even large numbers of people, when it suits their agenda.
One factor fueling the idea of Secret Service involvement is the possibility that the driver of the car, Henri Paul, was also working for security agencies.
Henri Paul was probably one of the many informants that both the British and the French had at this big hotel.
Henri Paul was certainly an informer for the French domestic security services.
I mean, you can see the interest. A big hotel, important people go there. Who do they meet? What are they there for?
He had been paid cash by somebody. He had accounts all over the world. The money trail, which some of us have looked at, pointed to the fact that, yes, he was in the pay of security services.
Je ne peux pas imaginer qu'il ait pu être.
I can't imagine him working for foreign powers and receiving money. It's certainly true that my friend had contacts with secret services, but, I repeat, it was only part of his job.
Uniquement dans le cadre de son travail. C'est quelqu'un qui gagne bien sa vie, il a 40
He was earning a good salary. He was 41.
très fortement qui touchait.
Also, I imagine that he used to receive lots of large tips in cash. That's my explanation.
Ça de cette façon.
But even if Henri Paul were a paid informant or even an intelligence agent, it's hard to see what follows from that. What could the plot have been?
It is a very long jump from being an informer for a Secret Service to being an assassin for a Secret Service. And as far as I know, if there are assassins who work for Western Secret Services, they're not suicidal. I don't think that Henri Paul gave his life for MI6.
But some people believe Henri Paul was a patsy. They think he was lured to the tunnel by his Secret Service employers, so they could either detonate a bomb already inside the car or attack it in the tunnel in some way.
Alors, y a-t-il eu? Was there a detonator inside the car? It's possible and likely. And is it the reason why the car suddenly lost direction, with the wheel locked, totally out of control? Some witnesses also mentioned a flash, some kind of blinding grenade. It's not impossible, but it cannot be 100% proved. What is proved is that the detonation came from inside the car. We know that.
The French examined the car in the most minute detail, and they came to the conclusion that it was in perfect working order before it crashed, that the brakes were fully functioning, steering was fully functioning, and they found no evidence whatsoever of an explosive device.
The finding that the car was mechanically sound rules out any theory that it had either been sabotaged in advance or that it was attacked in the tunnel. A major alternative conspiracy theory has, however, grown up around a significant discovery made by this man, the head of the police investigation.
As I was collecting the evidence, I discovered some debris. Let's describe it as pieces of plastic from another car which was still unidentified. And so I was able, almost immediately, to reach the conclusion that there had probably been a collision of some kind. A road traffic accident.
The French police found traces of white paint on the front right wing of the crashed Mercedes and debris near the entrance to the tunnel from the rear light of a white Fiat Uno built between 1983 and 1987. From this, they were able to deduce what had happened.
In the right-hand lane, of course the French drive on the right, was a Fiat Uno. And he was going along at approximately 50 kilometers an hour, that's 30 miles an hour. Now, the roll of the white Fiat Uno, the French decided was what they call a benign role. In other words, it didn't ram the Mercedes and it didn't play any active role, but it just happened to be there. Now, Henri Paul saw him possibly late and he had to avoid him. And unfortunately, he lost it. He just clipped the back of the Fiat Uno with the front of his Mercedes. And as a result of that, he lost control, veering slightly to the right and then hitting the 13th pillar at well over 60 miles an hour, according to the investigation. The Fiat Uno, meanwhile, disappeared, never to be seen again.
The French police, nevertheless, tried unsuccessfully to find the white Fiat Uno and its driver.
We sent 3 units to investigate. We checked more than 3,500, maybe 4,000 drivers of that same type of car, of the same make, of the same year. We didn't find him.
It is very odd that the car has never, but never been found. The whole of France was searching for this vehicle, and it couldn't be found anywhere by police or anybody else or by accident. Absolutely extraordinary.
Some eyewitnesses reported seeing a flash coming from the tunnel.
A very powerful flash. Where did that come from? Well, it is now a distinct possibility, and I would put it stronger than that, that it came from the back of the mysterious Fiat motor car. That flash, of course, which was apparently so powerful, would indubitably have blinded the driver. Totally blinded him. We know how strong these flashes can be. I mean, the army uses them, as people know. Totally blinded him. Lost control. End of story.
A persistent rumour is that the mystery driver may have been James Anderson, a well-known paparazzi, who later committed suicide. He had a good relationship with Diana and Dodi, and also owned a white Fiat Uno. Some believe he was working for the Secret Services and lured the couple by mobile phone to take the unusual route through the tunnel.
One must remember that he was accredited to follow Diana and Dodi too. Dodi trusted him completely. We also know that Anundsen, as anyone in contact with VIPs, had been approached and investigated by the French Secret Services. He worked for them as an informer, in the way Henri Paul, the driver of the Mercedes, did. We believe it's highly probable that it was him who called Diana, because at the beginning the plan was not to go under the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, but to take the Champs-Élysées. So if someone close to them managed to convince them by phone to change the itinerary, there was only one person close enough. It was James Anundsen.
Unfortunately, the evidence does not show that. The French police interviewed him shortly after the crash and excluded him from their inquiries on the grounds that, A, he had receipts to show that he was buying petrol elsewhere in France at the time, that he had a plane ticket for the next day to go to Corsica. As significantly was the fact that his white Fiat Uno had been on bricks and had no wheels in a field outside his house, 160 miles away from Paris.
Sachez que la brigade criminelle s'est transportée sur place.
The criminal brigade went to the place where his car was kept. It had been there for months on blocks. They checked everything. That it had no wheels, the fact that it had not been used. We ruled him out, and I questioned him personally to confirm that he had not seen anything.
Suspicion about Anundsen intensified when, in May 2000, he was found burnt to death in his car, not the Fiat Uno, having apparently committed suicide.
Now, I interviewed the judge who did the inquest into his suicide, and she said, well, I'd love to have found something suspicious, but I didn't. What I found was that he committed suicide because of the problems in his personal life, which are quite well documented and certainly was documented to the inquest, and she found no evidence whatsoever that either he or his Fiat were in Paris on the night that Diana died.
In short, there really doesn't seem to be any hard evidence to link Anundsen to the white Fiat Uno in the tunnel. We believe that the French police did actually find the Fiat Uno driver. But having satisfied themselves of his complete innocence, we think they felt it best to protect his anonymity so he wasn't hounded by conspiracy theorists for the rest of his life. But another suspicion is why was the tunnel cleaned and reopened on Sunday morning, a mere 4 hours after the passengers had been removed?
When you have a normal accident, they don't chlorinate the roads afterwards. And they don't get rid of the wreck immediately either. Certainly not in Paris, where they cordon off sections of the road where there's been an accident.
In the morning, after collecting all the evidence, I allowed the tunnel to be reopened because there was no point in keeping the Alma tunnel closed as some kind of shrine. We could have kept it closed for 10 years. All the evidence had been collected. Everything that had to be recorded had been recorded. Therefore, I myself authorised the reopening of the tunnel and the traffic went back to normal.
The police and a French judicial inquiry both decided the true cause of the crash was the lethal combination of Henri Paul exceeding both the speed and the alcohol limit. Blood tests conducted here at Paris's Forensic Institute showed he'd been nearly 3 times over the limit. There were traces of antidepressant drugs, long-term alcoholism, and an enhanced level of carbon monoxide.
All the footage from the videos that were taken inside the Ritz Hotel that night showed Henri Paul walking around. Not once did it look as though he was drunk. There was no suggestion from any witnesses at all that he'd had a drink, and he was there for 2 hours at least before they took off. Just unbelievable.
Henri Paul was divorced and lived alone in these apartments, not far from the Ritz. He was well known and well liked in the area. He played tennis regularly, and he had a private pilot's license, having clocked up more than 600 hours flying time.
When I bought this restaurant in 1992, Henri Paul was already a client. And he used to come here each Wednesday with his friend at this table at 8:30. And what kind of souvenir I have? He was a good guy, a good French smiling guy. He used to pilot a little plane. I am an helicopter pilot, and we used to fly together. I knew him for a long time, you know, since 1992, and I've never seen him drunk before. So, as we say in French, gai, that means happy to live, but not drunk.
My friend loved life. As far as I'm concerned, I never saw him drunk, out of his mind, or staggering around drunk. I've got a medical certificate proving that he was in good health and qualified to pilot planes. A certificate signed 2 days before his death by a doctor approved by the Civil Aviation. He was perfectly normal.
So were the blood samples really Henri Paul's, or had they been swapped?
The obvious thing to do would be to alter the composition of his blood samples or replace them with somebody else's blood samples to make it look as though Henri Paul was drunk that night.
By chance that night, there was another corpse at the Forensic Institute, someone who died of alcoholism. The person who dealt with the blood tests has since had a fantastic promotion and won't discuss the tests. I simply wonder.
I was also present during the autopsy of Henri Paul. The procedure of the Forensic Institute, when samples are taken, they are, in front of me, automatically given a reference, numbered and sealed by us, and all under my name. They are my complete responsibility. Therefore, anyone who dares to think for a single instant that a substitution was possible, it's pure fabrication. I must underline this. So there you have it.
Because there were possible criminal charges against the paparazzi, an examining magistrate was appointed here at the Palais de Justice on the Tuesday immediately after the crash.
Judge Stefan, who was leading the investigation, was appointed on the Tuesday, and he did a very shrewd thing. On the Thursday, the 4th of September, he went back to the morgue and he supervised a second set of samples being extracted. And he did that in the presence of some police officers and some members of the judiciary. And he had it photographed. And the significant thing about those samples is they showed exactly the same results as the first set of samples.
There's a world-famous analyst, chemist from New Zealand, who in the 1970s began examining Air Force fighter pilots who were killed in crashes. He discovered, and it is now accepted, that in such accidents, the guts, people's guts, create this ethanol. It's produced in a crash, in a major crash, and that seeps into their blood. As a result of which, when you take their blood, it appears that they're being on alcohol. Not so.
But independent experts say that the refrigeration of bodies stops this process and that it couldn't explain the alcohol levels found in Henri Paul. There's probably a much simpler explanation.
As a police officer of many, many years, the number of alcoholics and drunks that I've seen taken to the police stations that have been drink driving that could walk a straight line is quite normal. A hardened alcoholic, somebody that drinks regularly like that, will appear to be fairly regular. The one thing you cannot see is what's inside his brain, and that is this impairment, this ability to react quickly, his ability or inability to concentrate.
The elevated level of carbon monoxide in Henri Paul's blood And oddly, he was the only occupant of the car to show such levels. Seems puzzling, however.
We know from the paparazzi, from the bodyguards and from witnesses that he was busy smoking cigars as he wandered around the Ritz before he left, and that would increase the level of carbon monoxide in the blood. And the tests themselves did not come up with anything particularly extraordinary. One test came up with a high level, another test with a low level. Averaged out, there was no real significance at all.
Many people who believe Diana was murdered say it was because she was pregnant with Dodi El Fayed's child, and the royal family couldn't countenance a Muslim child so close to them. They also allege that Diana's body was embalmed in France to hide the evidence. Princess Diana's body arrived back in Britain on Sunday afternoon. For the first time ever, we can now reveal exactly whether or not she had been embalmed in France and explain why this issue has become so confused. After her body left the airport, it was taken directly to a mortuary in West London.
About the embalming, I want to make it quite clear about the difference between a full embalming and a partial embalming. A full embalming involves the perfusion of all the arteries of the body, and the embalming fluid reaches all the organs and tissues of the body. This fluid destroys all evidence of any kind of bacteria or germs or viruses that may have been in the body. In the case of the Princess of Wales, this full embalming did not take place. What we saw when we first saw the body was that the neck had been packed with cotton wool soaked in embalming fluid, presumably to embalm the head, where normally the fluid would have been injected into the arterial system and would have embalmed the head via that route. It would have been gone through all the arteries in the body. The upper chest had been embalmed by cotton wool soaked in formalin, which is the formaldehyde fluid, put into the cavity. Again, this is quite different from a full embalming.
It seems this was done as a temporary cosmetic measure.
None of these attempts at this partial embalming had anything to do with the legs or the lower half of the body. Now, the uterus would not have been affected, in my view, by any of the embalming procedures I've just described.
But was she pregnant? At the time of her Mediterranean holiday, Diana was still apparently head over heels in love with a man she'd been seeing for 2 years, Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan.
She was phoning Hasnat every day from the boat, and she was phoning his family. She was responsible for the photographers being there. She phoned the photographer and said where the boat was, and then complained the pictures were too grainy. And it was the whole thing was set up with her and Dodi was set up to make Hasnat Khan jealous. Hasnat Khan was the man she wanted to marry.
Dodi and Diana apparently had separate cabins on board, and the bodyguards thought they were more like brother and sister than lovers. This makes a pregnancy seem unlikely. After the opening of Princess Diana's coffin at the mortuary, Robert Thompson witnessed her full autopsy.
Pathologist divided the uterus and said that she wasn't pregnant on the basis of a naked eye examination. I saw no evidence of pregnancy within the body. My conclusion must be that she wasn't pregnant.
If Princess Diana wasn't pregnant, and there wasn't a plot to murder her on that August night in Paris in 1997, who did kill her? Was it straightforwardly Henri Paul? That would be too simplistic. The real question is not who, but what killed Princess Diana. Four years before her death, as her marriage broke down and the pressures became overwhelming, Princess Diana decided to withdraw from public life. She also insisted that her royal police protection be removed, and that in turn removed one of the last remaining shields between her and the paparazzi.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did. I realized then their attention would inevitably focus on both our private and public lives. But I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear.
Diana had, for the past 16 years, lived under the protection of Scotland Yard. Suddenly to just jettison that. Here you have the most photographed woman in the world, somebody of iconic status, suddenly is walking alone. Now, that presented huge problems.
It was on the night of her death that the full implications of no royal protection were finally felt. Private bodyguards simply couldn't be as effective, especially against the paparazzi.
Well, on that night in question, there were two security officers, both of them ex-military. One of them had previously been in the parachute regiment, but neither of them had any police experience. That is not to say that they couldn't do an effective protection job in terms of physically getting between an assailant and the royal personage, but what they didn't have was that backup from the police, which good protection officers do need. They need to be able to get advance information. They need all sorts of information which only the police will have.
Any capital city of the world will on a daily basis have VIPs visiting their country. They have a department, they have a format to deal with this. They should have spoken to the embassy and spoken to the police. They would have been only too willing to provide some security.
But it was in dealing with the paparazzi that they made perhaps the most serious error.
What was the hysteria about? There were photographers who wanted to take their pictures. That the photographers were aggressive was absolutely true, because a few days before, one photographer had earned about $1 million with an out-of-focus picture from a very great distance of the two of them appearing to kiss out in the waters off Sardinia. So there was a kind of frenzy. Was it dangerous? Was anybody's life threatened at that moment? No, and there was no reason to believe that it was.
If you've got 100 journalists who want a good picture, it's in their interest that Diana stays alive. So you strike up a liaison, you actually build up a relationship with them to establish exactly what they want. Now that's what Rhys-Jones should have done, but he didn't. He actually he distanced himself from them and effectively made them their enemy. And when you play a game with the paparazzi like that and you try to lose them, it's a game you never win.
And why did Dodi El Fayed and his team not take the normal route to his apartment that night?
Somebody wanted to show off. Somebody wanted to outrun the paparazzi who were shooting photographs. And so they went down on the Cours la Reine, they put the pedal to the metal, Henri Paul did, drunk or sober, and they crashed in the tunnel.
John Stalker is the former Deputy Chief Constable of Greater Manchester and one of Britain's most respected policemen. He carried out a series of controlled speed tests in the Alma Tunnel for an inquiry in 1997 and 98, and has repeated them again today for us on camera. Mr. Stalker drove through the tunnel at a variety of speeds, increasing them each time by 10 miles per hour. He drove in daylight, but also in nighttime conditions, virtually identical to those in the hour past midnight on the 31st of August, 1997. As a fully qualified police driver with decades of experience behind him, what conclusion did he come to about the conditions of driving in that now infamous tunnel?
I've driven today in a similar Mercedes, not identical, but a very similar car, and I've done the same as I did 8 years ago. I've driven at various speeds, ranging from safe to just this side of unsafe. And frankly, my opinion is still very much the same. Anything more than 60 is absolutely criminally fast. It's just not built for speed. It's an urban tunnel.
The mathematical calculations showed that Henri Paul entered the tunnel at a minimum of 73 miles per hour and a maximum of 95 miles per hour.
Anybody entering that tunnel at between 75 and 95 miles an hour wouldn't need to have much else going against him before he crashed the car. If there was something else, it would make it almost inevitable that there was going to be an accident.
Do you know what Henri Paul's car was? Henri Paul's car was a Mini with, and not one of the new Minis, an old Mini with an automatic transmission. Now, let's say you're sober. If you're used to driving that kind of car and it's been a real long day and now you're in this high tension situation and you want to show that you're in control of things, as certainly Henri Paul wanted to show and probably Doty wanted to show, then you get in the car and you're Henri Paul and it's a huge Mercedes with anti-lock brakes, with a stick shift, and you go barreling down the Cours la Reine. What are your reflexes going to tell you? You've only been driving the car for about 4 or 5 minutes at that point. Are you going to really have the feel of it as it hits that bump going into the tunnel and the tires start to leave the ground? As all of a sudden you see another car, a Fiat Uno, sort of tootling through the tunnel and you try and avoid it? No. No.
In January 2004, the royal coroner, Michael Burgess, opened an inquest into Princess Diana's death. It couldn't start sooner because all legal processes in France had to be completed first. The French inquiries were solely concerned with whether the paparazzi had behaved criminally. But at the opening of the British inquest, the coroner asked Scotland Yard to investigate the wider question of whether there had been a murder conspiracy. The former Metropolitan Commissioner, Lord Stevens, is currently heading a team looking into this.
There are a lot of conspiracy theories that relate to the death of the 3 people down in this tragic death of 3 people in this tunnel. It is my job to report to the coroner every single aspect that has been investigated in terms of conspiracy theories to actually ensure that there is a thorough investigation of every single aspect of that.
Mr. Burgess has since resigned as coroner, and Lord Stevens will now report to his successor. Lord Stevens is likely to finally put to rest all the conspiracy theories that have dogged Diana's death by finding once and for all that there was no deliberate murder that night. But why do we so desperately want to believe there was?
People don't want to believe it was as stupid as it very probably was. And a conspiracy theory says no. Either it was a racist conspiracy by the royals because they didn't want Diana marrying or hanging out, much having the children of, an Arab, or it was MI6, it was some other dark conspiracy. Ah, yes, Charles wanted to marry Camilla, and the only way he could think of to handle the situation was to create or to sponsor an incredibly involved plot where you have to take Mohammed Fayed's own driver, put him at the wheel, and have him crash into a pillar in the tunnel under the Place de l'Alma. Does that make any sense? It does if you don't want the story to die.
Many people have not yet fully accepted the terrible suddenness of Princess Diana's death. They still want an explanation that makes sense. They still want her to be part of their lives. But in the end, everyone will have to live with the brutal truth. Diana's death was not conspiracy. It was simply tragedy.